Thank you, Ken. I'm Scott MacCready, his father. Some of what I'm going to say, without any coordination, correlates with what you're saying. Before I start, I want to point this plaque out. This is going to be mounted, I hope, on the retaining wall. I'll refer to the incident that this commemorates, as well as him. Virtually every word on here keys to something, just so you can sort of look at this as talking points. Before you stands a Dewey dad remembering the son. He almost had. Circumstances over the last year dramatically reduced the amount of time I was able to spend with Alex. Since his death, I've attempted to reconstruct his life during that year and before. The revealed truth amplifies Dunn's explanation. It tolls keener for thee than for me. Late in his life, Alex wrote, I never felt like I belonged anywhere except Dewey, if that counts. The school, for those who don't understand, operates under an unusual high-risk, high-reward protocol. While all who spend even a few months here benefit, most who enroll do not graduate. Those that do succeed are prepared to become exceptional moral leaders with self-esteem based on solid sense of academic and psychological accomplishment. Alex, we were told by the school's founder, was among the greatest students of all time. This from a man within only weeks of his own death and famously disinclined to pass out unearned accolades. Evidence of his transformation here can be observed in his effects on several individuals in the weeks before his death. This brings us to the point of this moment, appreciating what Dewey meant to him in a paraphrase of the title of Paul Gauguin's greatest masterpiece. What brought him to Dewey? What did he do here? And where was he going? Living in Shoreline, he was known as Mac to most, Mac Dog to a few, and Alex to his family. Mac with his grandfather's nickname all through high school, and like his grandfather, he was becoming a high school dropout, very bright but afflicted, not by entitlement, but in confidence in his worth. His primary sources of self-esteem seemed to arise from his snow sports expertise, his artist's talent, and his few young years as a commercial fisherman. He was arrested for attempted breaking and entering in middle school and given a diverted sentence if he stayed out of trouble until he was 18. Within a few years, while facing severe consequences if caught, he began lightweight drug dealing. With the money he accumulated, he later admitted he thought he might move to Oregon and change his identity. As things evolved, this remained his plan, sort of. He also admitted that drug dealing was intended mostly to compensate for his professed difficulties in establishing friendships. In 2 years, he accumulated a net profit of only $400. But it had become a legendary source of the best stuff at the best price. He was buying friends. By the middle of junior year, he had fallen a year behind in the school credits and held a 1.5 cumulative GPA. On a Friday in early March 2009, he went to school with a commercial quantity of marijuana and a scale in his backpack, intending to sell at a party after school. However, he was also drunk on a bottle of codeine, cough syrup, which earned him a trip to the office. Fortunately for him, and for us, the campus security officer was not sent. A staffer decided to retrieve him from the classroom. As he was being walked across the campus, he recognized the catastrophe that would befall him if the pack was examined, and he ran off campus. If the escort had been a security officer, he could have been pursued off campus for resisting arrest. He was merely expelled. He entered a wilderness program in southern Utah on my birthday a few days later. 8 weeks later, he entered the John Dewey Academy in Great Barrington. All Dewey graduates are above average, but they don't arrive that way. They arrive with a unique configuration of issues, and their issues have overwhelmed their assets. When asked during his admission interview at Dewey what he thought he might do after graduation, he said he might go to Kosrae for driver certification. He clearly had no sense of his potential. Tom Bratter, the school's founder, conducted the interview and recognized that this lack of self-appreciation might be a hindrance to success, but would not be a barrier to admission. While Dewey was the perfect place for him, he was not a typical Dewey student. His had not been a life of entitlement or shepherding by helicopter parenting. In fact, he had pursued a life of subsistence, feeding a fantasy of economic independence and personal autonomy through stealing food and used clothing and spending as much time as possible at friends' homes. His first challenge here was to get real, and the first step on that path was to drop Mac and become Alex. He began with a very high aspiration for rapid promotion and to impress with his creativity. Soon after arriving, he began to reveal hints of what would eventually become in full fruit an astonishing set of talents. A rock in a burlap sack was emerging as a Fabergé jeweled egg. Early in his stay, on a parent weekend, some parents were watching some kids playing frisbee on the back lot from the terrace, and soon the disc landed in the pond. I turned to another, pointing him out, and said, "He'll be going in after it." Sure enough, with no discussion or hesitation, he waded in, up to his armpits, to fling it back to the group. Soon thereafter, perhaps feeling not engaged, he climbed the wall and turned himself in. There and then, his struggle began. Alex drew and he painted. He was an artist. We know because within and among his writings, he embedded glimpses of what he observed, inferred, and invented. He preferred watercolor or ink, as did his great-grandfather. We can see the evolution of his inner life as his subjects shifted from violence and anger and powerlessness before Dewey towards natural beauty. He thought of himself as an artist, but soon discovered his talent for language, particularly French and English, and began to acquire study skills for the first time at 17 years old. While no one would challenge his artistic ability or creativity, his other strengths became apparent to him for the first time. Thus, he became a writer. He wrote reactions, refractions, reflections on all manner of things. He wrote from solitude and about solitude and in solitude, sentence after sentence, completely composed, flowing perfectly formed from his fountain pen and the tiny script in his moleskin notebooks. Thank God he was a writer, because he left a large corpus of perspectives on people and relationships, on events and objects, and on ideas. In these, I think I found him. He became knowledgeable in 19th century Russian English literature, French poetry, and philosophy. After only 3 years of instruction, with no immersion, he could translate French language internet streams in real time. As a high school senior, he earned an A- in upper-level class in Russian literature at Williams College. If you know of Williams College, enough said. He became a remarkable writer, developing a talent barely discernible before. His papers typically pursued deep nuance with titles that evoke real curiosity about what he might be offering. One titled Nietzsche and the Number E in Marx's Capital utilized the mathematics of nature for deeper insight into political economy. He found buried voices like Russian dolls in the Brothers Karamazov, and elsewhere diagrammed that geometrically on a napkin. This from someone who refused to take math classes because he had trouble getting the right answer. In a Western Civ term paper, he developed the thesis that Christian principles of fairness promulgated by Catholic teachings fundamentally influenced the development of national legal structures of the emerging nations of Europe in the late Middle Ages. His Oxford-trained historian teacher said it might be an original contribution and publishable in a journal of legal history. The list goes on. A Red Scent, Blanche Dubois' Death and Restitution, Silent Dialogue, Words and Wordlessness, and Anna Karenina, Control Alt Exist, and Concerning Frailty in Beethoven's Art. Finding himself dissatisfied with this paper a year later, he was revising it while at Kosrae, evincing another feature of his work. These weren't assignments to be completed, submitted, and forgotten. They were his purpose and not left behind. Yet these are not evidence of his greatest achievements. Those arose in the course of building a personal center based on addressing and defeating deep self-doubt, taking responsibility for how he reacted to challenges imposed by his personal history and events beyond his control. He described the process as akin to tearing down a stone house and then reconstructing it in different alignment configuration from exactly the same stones. It seemed like building a new castle from the stone home in which he lived. He did this under dire threat of expulsion with virtually no guidance and little interaction with most students. Alex credited one student in particular, Johnny Smathers, with keeping him moving on his path to ultimate success. That relationship became a seminal feature in the Dewey community, viewed by many as the model friendship. This brotherhood proved to Alex that he could find belonging and true connectedness with others. This breakthrough demonstrated that he had overcome the issues that had brought him to Dewey and gave him a bearing on which to travel through the travails he would face later in life. The next 18 months were spent strengthening these acquired skills and teaching them to others. Among the lessons he learned and taught was that you can't change who you are. You can, however, change how you live as who you are. He developed an almost Socratic method of support for other students and their parents. which involved incisive, non-judgmental questions taken from his own experience, but often as apparent non sequiturs in the conversation of the moment. In the last few weeks of his time, he led the community through several days of intensive recovery from traumatic events by which he was probably the most affected. An observer said that he helped each of nearly 30 students find their individual solution, often by means that were uncanny. The founder of this school, in his prolonged absence, came to rely on him as his go-to eyes and ears in the community. On Kosrae, he befriended a 10-year-old, accepted an invitation for a sleepover, and coached this young friend away from the issues he had lived. His efforts were recognized in his speech at his Kosrae memorial by perhaps the island's most honored statesman, who twice described him as a fine gentleman. He was accepted by Reed College, remember Oregon, as an exemplar of a new recruitment target, someone who shared experiences too common among their traditional entrants, but who had developed strength of character and a commitment to finding belonging in a community without resorting to substance abuse. He was thought likely to emerge as a catalyst for change on the basis of his high abilities, his charisma, and having been there and done that. His application became a basis for reconsideration of their historical admission criteria, just as they were changing leadership to address this very issue. His advocate in that process wept when informed of his death. So where was he going? Over time, he began using his given first name, initially when signing art, like his artist great-grandfather, but eventually on applications and his email address and basically everything he'd used where he used Alex. I've talked with people who never knew him as Alex or Mac. Meeting you today, he would probably have introduced himself as Wesley. Wesley, I believe, was the new identity he aspired to adopt in Oregon. I suspect it was acknowledgement of being the third of 4 generations in his lineage to carry the name, because he'd become very conscious and thoughtful about his lineage. It seemed that he was adopting a Joycean perspective on his life, explicitly, consciously connected with the generations before, yet aspiring to carry forward strengths while leaving behind the demons of his forebears. Such syntheses had become his norm, living life as art, applying science to humanities, making himself the canvas of his creativity. I explained to him that I could not claim to be proud of him because that could imply that I deserved some credit for what he had achieved. I did tell him that I admired and respected him, and I loved him, regardless of what he had done or would do. He did it himself, despite various and several impediments. In fact, as he overcame the obstacles we presented, he became that much stronger. He became so much better than I could have imagined. He certainly exceeded any standard I might have represented or stipulated. I was astonished and amazed. I had expected to help him in college, for example, as I had not been able to while at Dewey, assuming my extensive education could finally bring some value. Upon examining what he had become, I concluded I could only help by becoming a student, so he might learn by teaching. While he had spent 3 years honing a keen edge in humanities, he intended to pursue neuroscience at Reed. He had become interested in memory formations, drawn there by recognizing with the prodding of another Dewey student that most memories are false since they change over time. Yet, since we only know ourselves as memories, our autobiographies are false. Was he looking for the dynamics that underlay changing self-image and interpersonal relations and the keys to success at Dewey? I'm told that his next planned step was film school, possibly to utilize neuroscience in storytelling. When in 10th grade, I had suggested that he look into film production as an apt application of his special talents. In the end, he was taken at full circle, adopting his mother's field as his own in pursuit of a suggestion from another life. I was looking forward to learning with him, exploring ideas, and discussing his plans for a bright and wonder-filled future in the relatively few years left for me. His future had become my raison d'etre, as he'd have said. He knew that, and he told me so in his last note. Nothing could have meant more to me from him. Upon examination of his journaled life and discussing him with friends and faculty, I found something I had not anticipated. But let me preface my finding with some definitions of a state of being. Able to reveal self-evident truth with no discernible path from common knowledge. Mainly an affair of energy. One is not born so, one becomes so. It is no more than childhood recaptured at will. That's a quote from Charles Baudelaire, his favorite poet. Each of these is a definition of genius. There are many more, no less apropos. As we know, Dewey graduates leave better and different in ability than when they arrive, and I believe he became a genius while at Dewey. In scholarship, moral leadership, and in art, he came to shock us all with prescient insight and was able to flip the script, as one put it, to move us from the obviously apparent to deeper levels, often shifting our understanding of ourselves and our world. One Dewey graduate, after hearing of his death, reached out to say, upon reflection, he realized that probably every day he found occasion to ask, what would Alex think? Others have called this perspective the Alex slant. He was criticized for climbing trees when he began at Dewey, accused of seeking attention in isolation. Perhaps. Or perhaps he was seeking perspective in solitude, ultimately his distinctive competencies. Near the end, he revisited those old immobile friends, each presenting a different opportunity of engagement, making friends with each in its own way, no two trees being alike. He had told me he intended to start a tree climbing club at Reed.